Hello, welcome to Holistically Speaking. I am Morella DeVoe, your host. Our mission with Holistically Speaking is to be the avenue through which the voices of holistic health reach you at the time you need it most. And today we're talking about depression and suicide. Today is our first show on this topic. We're going to be doing a few shows with different practitioners. We're going to be coming to you twice with my guest today, who is Dr. Heather Rice. Thank you so much for joining me, Heather.
Thank you for inviting me.
I am really looking forward to having this conversation with you and with the other practitioners that will be joining me later this month. It's kind of heartbreaking the way this topic has come about. We started talking about doing this show about a month ago or so when a well-known law professor in Vermont committed suicide. And all of a sudden we were, well, not all of a sudden, but we were all shaken by it. And we were already planning on having this show, and then we heard the news of Robin Williams, his death as well, shocking everybody. Mm-hmm. And so it got us talking about what's going on. There are so many people that are struggling so much. Nobody's talking about it, at least not in a different way. And we know that there's a lot that they can do, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah.
So I wanted to start off by sharing and kind of setting the stage for how big of a problem this is. In the US, the rate of depression, according to the CDC, is 9%. So 9% of the population is depressed and diagnosed as depressed. Mm-hmm. So probably a lot more people not even diagnosed. And the average worldwide, the rate of depression worldwide is 5%. So in the US, it's not quite double, but significantly higher.
Yeah.
And the other thing that was particularly startling for me is that it said, the statistics say that in 1991, the depression rate was 3%. So it means that it's tripled in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a big problem.
And then the suicide rate is 12.7 people per 100,000. And in Vermont, it's 14.3 people per 100,000. So the suicide rate is higher in Vermont than in... So this is a really big problem. And what got me thinking, just looking at the fact that depression has tripled over the last 20 years, makes me think that we definitely are doing something wrong. And we need to start either learning a new way of dealing with depression, helping people understand about depression, and I know that we have lots of different ideas and tips and tools that we're going to share with our viewers. Now, to set the stage a little bit more, and I'll then shift it to you. Our viewers might be wondering why I might have invited a chiropractor to talk about depression and suicide. And so you brought this wonderful little cartoon, Peanuts cartoon, that does a beautiful job of illustrating it. And so I wanted to share that with our viewers, and that'll set the tone for how we'll be talking about this. So if you can read this to us.
Well, Charlie Brown is there with his head down saying, "This is my depressed stance. When you're depressed, it makes a lot of difference how you stand. The worst thing you can do is straighten up and hold your head high, because then you'll start to feel better. And if you're going to get any joy out of being depressed, you've got to stand like this."
So he's talking about the posture of a depressed person.
Yeah.
So we're going to definitely talk about posture. I'm really curious to get into that topic with you in a little bit. But so we're doing something wrong about how we're living life and what we're doing about depression. So what do you think we're doing wrong as a population?
I think the first thing we have to recognize is, how does depression happen? And we know there are lots of factors. There's genetics, but then there's also physiology, there's our environment, there's the psychology.
Yeah.
And so many times, perhaps it's being looked at from just a narrow lens of, oh, it's in my family, and so it's genetic, nothing that we can do about it.
Right.
Or, oh, it's just I have an imbalance of chemicals in my brain.
Right.
Or, oh, I just have a hard life,
Right.
psychological aspect. oftentimes the physiological one is overlooked. Like what factors in the environment are affecting my physiology?
Right.
What in my internal environment is affecting my emotions and
Right.
my perspective of the world?
Right.
So as a chiropractor, I'm always looking at physiology, I'm looking at lifestyle, I'm looking at the effect of the environment on the physiology.
Right.
If we look at just health in general, all the experts will tell you that there are 3 factors that will determine your health. Genetics is one of them. If you
Right.
could look at it as 3 overlapping circles: genetics, environment, and lifestyle.
Right.
And where they overlap, right, is how they each affect each other.
Right.
So the genetics, you can't do much to change that, except that environment and lifestyle choices can actually turn genes on and off.
Right.
And that can then affect our physiology. Our environment, we have a limited control over. You can't hold your breath when you go outside,
Right.
right? You can't not be in a certain family. You're
Right.
just in that family.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's a part of your environment. But lifestyle is all about the choices that you make. And
Right.
that can affect the environment, and then it can affect the genetics.
Right.
And that then affects our health. And that's how we take that bigger picture of health and then we apply it to any degree of human experience. So if we bring it
Right.
down to the diagnosed illness or health concern of depression, my lens on the world is let's look at the physiology, let's look at how our lifestyle choices and our environment are affecting how our genes might be expressing themselves,
Right.
as well as just how our bodies are working and even how it impacts our perspective on the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah, and what you're talking about in terms of looking at the lifestyle choices, the physiology, the environment, it definitely starts to send us down a path of, dare I say, prevention, of doing things that would keep you healthy. I think when I look at depression in particular, or just in the context of this show, but if I look at depression, I realize that the solutions that we have, the tools that we have for people who are dealing with depression is almost like an after the fact. You have depression, here's a pill. You have the psychiatrists and the psychologists who can do wonderful service for people with depression, but they are already depressed.
Yes.
So they are already depressed, and so my question is, how can we help people not get to the point of despair, to the point of despondency, of really muted emotions where they're not even experiencing any joy, any sort of contentment even in life, where they're just so muted. So as we talk to you in your world about the physiology, the environment, the genetics, where would you start by, if we wanted to share with our viewers, what are some of the first things that we should start looking at in terms of addressing these 3 spheres where depression might take place?
As you've described that, I realize there is a piece that has been so useful for a lot of the members of my practice when I teach them even how to look at health or disease. And when we think of depression, we think of it, if we could put a color on it, it would be darkness, right? But if we think of what actually is darkness, it's not a thing.
Yeah.
It's the absence of light.
Right.
Darkness is the absence of light. If you wanted to fix darkness, you can't do something to the darkness because the darkness isn't a thing.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, yeah.
You only can add light.
Right.
So when we think of any of our health concerns, if we think of sickness as a thing that we're trying to fix,
Right.
it's the same as trying to fix darkness.
Right.
Right? All we have to do to fix disease or illness is add health, right? Because illness is a lack of health.
Right.
So if we look at depression, I think one of the problems is we're trying to fix it as if it's a thing,
Right.
right? Apply a drug to it,
Right.
right? Or apply a psychology approach to it, to this thing.
Right.
And certainly there are therapists that are out there that work in a holistic way as well. So I'm not
Right.
putting a judgment on that. I just want to look at it as a bigger picture. If someone is struggling with depression, if they think of it as this evil thing that's overcome them,
Right.
they're going to look for an answer that's going to take that thing out or destroy that thing. Or,
And the other piece that can also confound the situation is that when all of a sudden you identify yourself as someone with depression, now you make depression a thing.
Yes.
This is the thing that I have. I am depressed, or I have this diagnosis, you know, and it becomes all the more real and unsurmountable almost, right?
Yes. And so if we think of, if we're looking at what do we need to add if we're struggling with depression, no matter how far along the range we're in, whether we feel like we're deeply in it or whether we're just not as vibrant as we used to be, just starting on that road, we want to look at what are the things that might be missing that are essential.
So how about we start talking about the physiology, that body, depression, where's depression happening? It's happening inside the body, right? And the brain, nervous system, and the organs, wherever, we're experiencing emotion or a lack of the emotion. So how can people start affecting change or improving their body, their physiology, from the perspective of depression?
Right. So first thing, just simple neurology of the brain, right? We have the conscious part of the brain, prefrontal cortex. Then we have a deeper part of the brain, which is where the emotions are processed. It's called the limbic system. Right? So the limbic tissue is where we process emotions. If depression is going to live anywhere, we could say it's something around the emotions. It turns out that there is more limbic tissue in the spine than there is in the brain.
Okay.
So if we think that it's all from here up, right?
We're
going to miss a big part. Candace Pert is the mother of neuropeptides, which are the molecules of emotion, she calls it. And she even talks about how our subconscious lives in our spine in all her work. So we know that there's been research that's Nobel Prize winning research showing that movement of the spine is what supplies 90% of the stimulation and nutrition to the brain.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like a windmill generating electricity, this movement of the spine is what feeds the activity in the brain. So that would then affect our perspective of the world as well.
Right.
So we have to start looking at movement as a key piece. There was a fascinating study that they did. They took 3 groups of depressed people. The first group, they gave them medication, Paxil, Zoloft, something like that. They gave them a medication. The second group, they had them exercise. The third group, they gave them the medication and they did the exercise. I think it was 6 weeks duration. At the end of it, they evaluated everybody to see what were the results. What do you think?
Well, I would expect that everybody who was exercising did better.
Yeah, exercise did best.
Yeah.
What do you think did second best?
The exercise and medication.
And then third, the worst was the ones that were just on the medication. But watch. Wouldn't you think if the medication actually did have even some benefit, that the person that got both would have the best? Better. Yeah, but it wasn't. So what does that tell us about the approaches right now, right, for depression? If we're not getting people moving and we're only giving them the medication, we're taking away from, right? So movement turns out to be one of the key pieces as far as affecting your physiology that can change, that can actually affect depression.
Well, and it also relates to the Charlie Brown cartoon, where if you're somehow moving the body, it's so phenomenal to see it in that little cartoon that, you have to, have a certain posture, a certain body language to go with the depression. And if you start moving the body, that actually it might start shifting, no?
Yeah. And they find that, of course, when we exercise, what do we produce in our body? The runner's high, we think of it, endorphins and kephalins, the neuropeptides of positive emotions. The very things that we may be giving people in medications, your body actually can produce that itself. And we can get that through exercise. Not to mention all the other benefits from exercise as well, but specifically for this, movement of the body is key. The other piece would be movement outside, getting daylight, getting real sunshine, 30 minutes of real daylight on your body, in your eyes, every day.
Yeah.
It helps the circadian rhythms be set so you get better sleep.
Right.
And it also triggers an uplifting of emotions.
Right. Which also is a perfect segue or connection to the idea of sunlight obviously having a mood-enhancing effect, where we might experience the winter blues,
Yes,
the
exactly.
seasonal affective disorder or depression in the months that have less light, because we don't have the light exposure, and people who get sun lamps actually notice an improvement in their moods. The other piece too that I wanted to bring up and see what you think, it was also one of the kind of little nuggets that got the hooks that got me thinking about doing this show, was that about a year ago when we did the shows on cancer, a naturopath who was on the show, he made a really strong statement where he said that he had yet to find anybody in Vermont who was not vitamin D deficient if they were not supplementing. So we're not getting enough sunlight, even, you know, and even potentially even through the summer months, we might still not be getting enough sunlight. So what have you seen, if you've studied this or learned, in terms of the relationship between vitamin D and depression?
Big relationship, yeah, in many ways. In fact, it's also, just as a side note, vitamin D has been linked to Alzheimer's and memory troubles, so we know it affects brain function in that way.
Right.
But it's definitely a connection. Another interesting piece about that, if they did studies looking for depression in primitive people, people that were, you know, just the tribes that were indigenous tribes that were living in the primitive way specifically, and they couldn't find depression there.
Interesting.
It didn't even exist when they looked at the Amish population.
Yeah,
it didn't exist.
That's
Why?
right.
Yeah,
There's
why
no
is that?
depression in the Amish
Yeah,
population.
and why is that? Look at how they're living. They're outside.
They're outside,
They're
and
spending
they're
a lot of time outside, moving their
integrated
body.
with nature in a much more natural way
Yes.
than we are. I wonder, and of course this is just a hypothesis, I wonder if this tripling of the depression rate in the US from the 90s to now is this, you know, internet era. You know, we're now on Facebook instead of talking to people, right? So instead of being out at a picnic, we're, you know, checking out people's pictures on Facebook. I mean, that's just a hypothesis of mine, but
It's all those pieces that are contributing to it. But another piece too for summertime is wearing sunblock.
right.
Wearing sunblock, you don't get any vitamin
Right.
D from the sun if you
It
do that.
prevents vitamin D synthesis. And people don't even realize this because we're told that we need to wear sunblock 24/7, put it on.
Because the sun is dangerous.
Because the sun is dangerous.
Yeah.
But then we can't produce vitamin D, and, you know, come the winter, everybody's depressed.
Yeah.
And with depressed immune systems, of course, because vitamin D is such an important factor in strong immunity.
Yes.
So we have movement, exercise, going outside, getting sunlight, and according to this naturopath in Vermont, we can't get enough sunlight in Vermont, and so we would need to supplement. So do you think that there's a need or an opportunity for people who are experiencing depression to maybe have their vitamin D levels tested? And
Oh, essential. Yeah, that would be one of the basic things that you'd want to
Yeah.
look at. Yeah. No question. Yeah.
so getting outside, sunshine, exercise, vitamin D, what else should we look at in terms of affecting the physiology?
Well, you know, vitamin D supplements, you would be eating them.
Yeah.
So what else could we be eating?
Right.
Or what else could we stop eating
Right.
that could be affecting our moods and our perspective of the world?
Right.
We know that sugar, there's a very old book that
Yeah.
came out called Sugar Blues.
The Sugar Blues.
Yeah,
Yep,
like
absolutely.
in the 70s, I think, right? Yeah, that was the first time I even thought about, wow,
Yeah.
sugar affects so much, including our moods.
Right.
So certainly removing sugar from your diet, because it's the spiking and dropping of the blood sugar levels that then affect our physiology.
Yeah.
And so that would be a big one.
Yeah, and that they interfere with brain functioning. And what else have you noticed? If you've studied the nutrition piece more closely, What else have you noticed in terms of the foods that people could eat to help depression?
I actually brought a list just to make sure that I wouldn't forget.
I kind of guessed.
Yes, and I just wanted to come up with it. I mean, this is not the only foods, of course, but these
Yeah.
are some good ones. And I just put them in alphabetical order, and one isn't better than the other.
Right.
But things like asparagus, avocados, berries,
Yeah.
cashews, chamomile tea, chocolate, dark chocolate, that
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
right? So
Yeah, the
healthy dark chocolate. Watch out for sugar. So
Right.
avoid the dark chocolate that has the sugar in it, right?
Right.
Because then you're defeating the cause here. Garlic, grass-fed beef,
Yeah.
green tea. My favorite one is called Dian Luishan,
Oh.
which is known to have a euphoric effect.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And where can we get that?
Dobra carries it.
Oh,
Dobra
nice.
Tea House does.
Okay.
It's not the only place, but that's the one I know. And then oatmeal,
Yeah.
oranges, and walnuts.
Oh, lovely.
Those are some good ones.
Lovely list. And with the chocolate in particular, one of the things that I look at chocolate as a superfood.
Yes.
I don't eat chocolate bars or Hershey Kisses or anything like that. But, you know, I help people make things like chocolate smoothies where you have fruits and vegetables and almond butter and flaxseed oil and all these, and then you make it into a chocolate shake, adding raw cocoa or unsweetened cocoa, and now you have a chocolate treat that is full of antioxidants, it's full of mood boosters, you know. And it's funny because when I first started in my own health kick and starting to live this lifestyle, when I had those shakes, I'd burst into giggles because it was, you know, having a drink that was so ridiculously delicious. And it was good for me too. And I was just like, God, this couldn't possibly be good for me because it tastes so good, but it is.
Yeah.
So it's possible to, you know, well, let's have fun with chocolate, you know, to help our depression, to create that physiology where the brain, you know, you said earlier, one of the favorite catchphrases is that depression is, you know, chemicals in the brain being out of balance. Well, if we believe that a little pill can change the chemicals in the brain, how about having bowls and bowls of chemistry and chocolate and avocados and asparagus and oatmeal and walnuts, right?
That don't have any side effects.
That don't have any side effects,
Yeah.
exactly, that don't cause suicidal thoughts.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how about omega-3s? Is there anything in particular that you've seen with omega-3s?
Well, very important also for just feeding the brain.
Yeah.
Important for brain function. So, yeah, I always include fish oil as a foundational supplement along with the vitamin D to just make sure that we stay healthy.
Yeah.
The other one I would include, did you want to say anything more about fish oils?
No, go ahead.
Yeah.
We can jump
The
back.
other foundational one that I recommend to everybody is probiotics.
Right.
If you're not getting those live enzyme foods in your diet, then you must take a probiotic supplement because we know that not only do probiotics ensure that you have good digestion,
Right.
but 70% of your immune system lives in your gut, so it does affect your immune system.
Right.
And now we know that the probiotic cultures in your gut will affect brain function.
Yep. And the enteric nervous system as well, all of the nerve endings that are, you know, millions and millions. There are some people are calling it like the second brain,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
There are so many nervous cells attached to the entire digestive tract that, you know, that phrase, you know, or expression of having a gut feeling, or, you know, feeling pain, sadness, you know, in your heart, or fear in your belly, or whatever, that it's a very real thing. We are experiencing it in that region. So,
Yes.
and I think you're touching on the three maybe cornerstone supplements for people with depression that if for anybody, I think, either whether they're taking antidepressants or not, or anybody who's feeling the need to do something, that vitamin D, omega-3s, and a probiotic, or eating fermented foods, you know, like kefir and kimchi and sauerkraut.
The healthy old-fashioned dill pickles, apple cider vinegar.
Exactly, that help to rebuild that intestinal bacteria. that those are like the cornerstone supplements to begin with.
Yes, and just one other piece about the vitamin D, really important to take vitamin K2 with the vitamin D.
Right.
So that you also at the same time are removing the calcium from the arteries and the organs and putting it right into the bones.
Yeah. So before we run out of time on the show, I want to talk spine and posture and what you specifically might see. So you have an illustration for us of the spine, and I'm curious if there are different spots on the spine or different vertebrae or sections of the spine that are maybe more linked to people, where if people have misalignments or subluxations, as you call them, in certain regions of the spine that maybe they experience depression. So we can show that slide. Maybe you can tell us about that.
Yep. So basically we know that the very top of the spine is right where the brainstem comes down from the brain into the neck.
Yeah.
That's one of the key areas that it supplies the nerve supply for structures of the head. So that one is a classic one that I'll find.
Right.
The C1 and C2, the upper cervical vertebrae, the very top of the spine. Also, it's interesting that C3 is often related to anxiety. It's the one that affects the diaphragm. And when we're anxious, which often couples depression, we're not breathing as deeply. And so those often are linked.
Yeah.
In the middle of the spine, T9 is the area that is linked to the adrenal glands. Once again, that's linked to stress mode. And oftentimes stress is what is also in sync with depression.
Right.
And then finally, at the very bottom of the spine, the sacrum, the coccyx, and even L5 area is affecting endocrine system with the reproductive organs. So we know endocrine system is going to be part of our emotions and our perspective of the world as well.
And so I know that your style of chiropractic is very gentle. You just do very light touches, and those light touches help to reestablish communication to those areas of the spine, right?
Right. So as long as the messages are getting from the brain down through the spinal cord, out to the cells, and back again without interference, we get to be healthy.
Right.
But if there's any misalignment of the vertebrae, it can put pressure on the nerves, and now we start to see a breaking down in function.
So you're going to be teaching people a whole lot more about depression on a teleclass that's coming up that you're going to, so over the phone essentially. And we want to show you how you can sign up for that class. There's a screen where you can see Dr. Heather's website, and that is www.wellspringcls.com. That's your website where people can just contact you, find your office, and all of that. And your teleclass is coming up on October 2nd at 7:30 p.m. And the specific page on your website is that wellspringcls.com/SAD1014, as in October 14, SAD1014. So people can sign up for it. Is it a free teleclass? Or?
Free. Yep, absolutely free.
So that's wonderful. People can just go onto this page and sign up for your class and listen to a whole lot more about depression.
Yes.
So is there anything else that we have?
Yeah, I'll just leave with this idea of a bigger idea of the nervous system. The best definition I know is through the nervous system we perceive the world, adapt to stress, coordinate all body parts and functions, express emotion, and create our conscious reality.
Yeah.
So if we have dysfunction in the nervous system, it can affect our perspective of the world.
Right. So we talked about movement, exercise, interacting with nature, getting sunlight, taking some basic supplements, vitamin D, omega-3s, probiotics, vitamin K, cutting out sugar. We talked about healthy fats, walnuts, avocados, asparagus, and getting chiropractic care for nervous system interferences. Phew, was that it?
Yeah.
So we're going to have another show next week for our viewers with you as well, because we're going to be talking about some other perspectives on depression. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching. I'm sure you learned a lot with Dr. Heather today, and join us next week to hear more about what Dr. Heather has to say about depression and suicide. Thank you.